Hello, everyone, and welcome into the second episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. This is your host, Robert Zaglinski. Uh, Today, we're going to talk a lot of OTA stuff, a lot of storylines surrounding the Bears, and joining me as my co-host tonight is Sam Householder. Sam, how you holding up?
I'm good. Just doing the summer chores around the house, and ready to talk some Bears.
Let's jump right into it, man. So Victor Cruz, the Bears signed him last week. No one's really sure if he has anything left in the tank. No one's sure if he's going to actually contribute. People have been talking about mentorship that he'll offer Cameron Meredith, Kevin White. I don't know what we should necessarily expect. They did give him $2 million guaranteed, so he's going to make the final roster. What are your initial thoughts on signing him?
I thought it was an interesting move. It's one that we've seen from Pace before, where he kind of gives a veteran one of those one-year prove-it kind of deals. This is a guy, he's been a top-level player before, but he's really 5 years removed from his best season as a pro. So I don't know how much you can expect from him. He was healthy last year, which is saying a lot for him. But the numbers just weren't there. 1 touchdown, I think something like 29 receptions. Granted, the Giants have a decent receiving core with Sterling Shepard and obviously ODB. Everybody knows Beckham, but so I don't know if fans should really expect like 2012 Victor Cruz. I think that we've seen a lot of receivers come in late in their careers, and fans get a little bit excited, and then it never seems to work out. So I think that that's kind of how we got to view this. Anything he can contribute is kind of gravy, but his availability and everything, a really good season for him might be like 50 receptions, 700 yards, like handful of touchdowns. That would be probably, we'd all be ecstatic if he could do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what people have been talking about was his leadership or being a veteran and how he'll affect, like I said, Meredith and White more than his play. But that's kind of overrated, isn't it? That's not necessarily going to be something to expect where he's going to rub off and all of a sudden Cameron Meredith is going to be like T.O. and Kevin White's going to be Larry Fitzgerald just because he's offering them sagely advice. He's speaking to them and giving them advice and rounding them out. That'll be off of their own merit. If he has any actual impact, it'll be like you said, it'll be those handful of touchdowns. It'll be 700, 800 yards. And I'm not exactly so confident that, he had the injury that Danny Trevathan had last season, the patellar tendon. And most guys don't really recover that. you see Jimmy Graham from the Seahawks coming back, but even then he took the entire training camp season. He took a little time getting comfortable. Cruz still hasn't really done that. He's already past that initial threshold that Graham had.
Yeah, and about that like veteran leadership, like you said, I think that stuff tends to be a little bit overrated by fans and in a lot of cases the media too. Maybe he's a locker room leader in a locker room that doesn't have a whole lot of offensive leaders right now, or obvious offensive leaders, I should say. But at the same time, the mentorship thing, the veteran presence, all that really gives you is, maybe he helps Kevin White learn the route tree and how to study the playbook. But, just other than like work habits, I don't know, the whole mentorship thing is definitely a little overrated in my book too.
Let's talk about Kevin White, who, he missed the one of the initial practices the Bears had at OTAs, but by reports, which we can't really fully disclose on, he's been practicing otherwise. Of craziness, a little too much on edge because he missed a practice for a player that's had 2 freak injuries to start his career has robbed him of 28 of 32 games. Or, I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, the reputation precedes itself. I mean, you're going to be more concerned about a player like that, right?
Yeah, I think that's where it all came from, especially too the limited media availability that the media has to the off-season stuff. And so the media gets 1 day a week, and so they come in for their 1 day a week, and the player that's missed just about all of the last 2 seasons is sitting out. They're going to jump on it because there's a limited number of storylines that come out of these workouts. So, I think the panic was there. And I think that it was legitimate because the Bears did themselves no favors.
As usual.
Yeah, exactly. As usual. John Fox had every opportunity to just say, hey, you know what? It had rained and, he's still recovering. And so we were just being overly cautious. But, of course, he had to do his whole John Fox, like, well, we're not going to talk about it, and I'm going to ignore it. And, it's up to the trainers. And, as far as I know, he's, doesn't have an issue or whatever. And all that gray area just opens you up to then the media is going to go a whole week and go, well, is Kevin White healthy? We don't know, because the one practice we saw he was standing on the sideline and the coaches wouldn't confirm or dispel anything, so everything's on the table. And then a week later they get their next media look and it's like, oh yeah, okay, he's out there going full speed, so I guess it was nothing. But you still had 7 days of virtually nonstop talk,
speculation
of is White okay, how's his rehab. So, and that's just the kind of thing that I think irritates us as fans when the team has been so down for several years and they do themselves no favors. And it's like, you guys haven't earned any of the benefit of the doubt, so we're not going to give you any. And so it just, it just doesn't help anything. It doesn't help Kevin either. I mean, it's really almost throwing that dude under the bus, like, because he can't disclose anything, and the team won't like have his back and be like, oh yeah, we just gave him like a day off or whatever. So yeah, the whole thing was a little bit overblown, but I can see why. Like it was perfectly reasonable for everybody to go, what's going on here, until they could see that nothing was going on.
I mean, and you see them misplaying these injuries recently with Fox in the past few years too, specifically with Kyle Fuller, who had a knee scope and then ended up missing the entire season. Pernell McPhee pushing past his knee, that's now been a big problem for his own availability. So like you said, benefit, I mean, they haven't earned any trust for them to say like, oh, when they say it's okay, we don't necessarily just subscribe to listening to that.
Yeah.
We actually have to see the evidence on the field.
Yeah.
And it's most detrimental for White. Like you heard him talk about, he talked last week after Cruz spoke, how frustrated he is. He balked at someone calling him a bust. That's all anyone could do at that moment, because the Bears won't defend him. So he has to stand on that platform and just and take crap, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, he seems like the kind of guy this is going to motivate him. And, honestly, my concern is that at this point, he knows that this is do or die. And I guess I would be concerned that the poor guy is going to force himself to play hurt because he knows that this cloud is hanging over him. And maybe that is where Victor Cruz can come in and say, hey, look, like, it's going to be okay. If you're hurt, don't push yourself. But, other than that, though, yeah, I mean, no one's going to give the Bears the benefit of the doubt. And I think that on John Fox, like, I think that he came to Chicago kind of thinking that he would have the credibility build up that he had with his winning teams in Denver and Carolina, where everybody will kind of go along with like the no information and the giving him the benefit of the doubt. But it's like, you haven't done anything in Chicago, so why should we take you at your word and everything? Like, so he's not doing himself any favors. I think that he kind of has this mentality of like, well, I'm a winning coach and have this great track record, but we're all standing here going, where is it? Where is it?
9 wins in 2 years.
Yeah.
An injury misplayed after injury misplayed. What do you think are reasonable expectations for White? So let's talk like statistics, and let's say like what you would want to see in 2017.
I'd say if he plays anywhere over 10 or 12 games, I think
10 or 12? That seems low.
It does seem a little low, but I think we have to set the bar low right now. If he makes it through a month of the season, it would be nice. And I think that, like, statistically, I would hope for like 60, 65 balls. We don't know where he's at as a player because he hasn't had on-field development. He's been inside inside an NFL playbook and looking at NFL route trees for 2 years, but he's barely had time to run any of them. So, that's kind of, I don't know. It's a third rookie year for the poor guy. So I think you got to say, as long as he's healthy and he's on the field, I think, 60, 65 catches, 900 yards, 5, 6 touchdowns. I think then you'd be like, you know what? This wasn't a bust. He has the talent. He just hasn't been able to show it. And I think that's what I would need to see out of him. And if he can do that in like 12, 14 games, then I think it would really, I think a lot of fans would feel better. And then for me personally, that would kind of take the bust label off of him because we would say, hey, you know what? He had the talent all along. He just hasn't been healthy enough to show it.
Meredith is the clear number one, right? And then he just had his own thumb injury. There were reports that he might have had surgery. Does it take pressure off of White, the fact that Cruz and Meredith are maybe trustworthy, or they're on the higher tier?
Yeah.
As opposed to him?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. He's supposed to be the deep threat. And there is no necessary like clear-cut number one here. I think that most people would view Cruz's best spot as the slot. Meredith is really, he is the number one. But last year, he was playing opposite Alshon, so we're not 100% what he can do when the defenses are really focused on him. We have some idea, but defensive coordinators are going to have a whole offseason to study his film, and cornerbacks are going to be looking at his game. So I think that there is some pressure off of White, but that he still has to be an impact receiver to keep his his draft pedigree and show what he can do.
Okay, so in that light, the Chiefs recently released Jeremy Maclin. There hasn't been any smoke to the Bears being interested in the 29-year-old, and he had injury problems last year, and he's probably a little pricey. But would you think that they should sign him, especially with Meredith's recent thumb injury, even though that doesn't appear to be serious? Though with the Bears, he could probably miss the entire season, knowing them.
I don't know. I'm torn about this because they put money into Victor Cruz. Obviously, they put money they brought back Cameron Meredith. They put money with Marcus Whedon. They put money in with Kendall Wright. And while none of those guys are, high-priced free agents, they had guaranteed money with them. They're going to be roster locks. And so I think that in that regard, you can't say that I just don't see a place for Maclin, unfortunately. I think he would be better than a lot of the guys they brought in. But the fact of the matter is that he got released so late in the offseason Ryan Pace had to make his moves. So now you're looking at it and you go, what are they going to do? Like cut a guy that they guaranteed money to and signed 3 months ago just to add Macklin? I don't know. I don't know what you think, but I would think that there's just not a spot for him right now.
I think he's probably more of a win now player too. I mean, the Bears aren't a rebuild, and Macklin's more of a guy you add as another complimentary receiver, like or legitimate at least number 2 guy. And as you mentioned, I mean, he's pricey. He's probably going to be at least $6 or $7 million. I don't know what there were reports that he visited with the Bills and Ravens. I don't know exactly what the terms were there, but it has to be at least in that range.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't make the deal because I'm also concerned that, I mean, he's had injury problems. There was 2 or 3 years ago, he really couldn't catch anything. He's been inconsistent his entire time in Kansas City. I didn't find that release as shocking as everyone else did. It was more that people realized the Chiefs probably aren't trying to win the Super Bowl this year.
Right.
But with a player like Macklin, I mean, you kind of would be. But like you said, offseason, they already signed Cruz. That doesn't leave any margin for error. And I mean, it's unfortunate when an NFL team releases a guy so late in the offseason because then he can't latch on to a team. But if I'm the Bears, I wouldn't necessarily prescribe away from that. So
yeah, exactly. I don't think that the Bears need to be like tripping over themselves to find a spot for him. Especially as you said, the price tag is going to be awful high, and I think he would be in a win now situation. He's going to be looking at teams that can compete.
The Patriots.
And yeah, they were always good for that like late off-season veteran that got released.
All right, let's move on to Jordan Howard. There's been a lot of people have been breaking him down a little bit lately. And there's been some talk that he's either going to more or less match that 1,300-yard season. He hasn't spoken during OTAs publicly, to my knowledge. And then there's also talk that with the Bears' lack of receiving options, lack of explosive talent on offense, question marks with Mike Glennon and Mitch Trubisky, that he could be in a slump, with 8-man boxes, that maybe he isn't that special. Where do you fall on Howard moving forward? Because remember that a lot of Bears running backs have had really good rookie seasons. So yeah. Anthony Thomas comes to mind. I mean, is Howard where's Howard on that spectrum?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Running backs are always kind of a crapshoot, right? Because they say you can find a running back anywhere. The Ezekiel Elliott's of the world are increasingly rare. So I don't know. I think that he's a solid running back. I think that the addition of like a Tarek Cohen through the draft, it kind of adds some of the elements of Howard's game that he's maybe lacking in the pass catching, in the speed department. But Howard, to me, is he's a very good first and second down back. His carries are going to be there. Until somebody can take carries away from him, it's really like his job. He's going to be the bell cow guy. So, as for like how defenses are going to adjust, like that stuff always happens. So it's just kind of we're going to see how he adjusts in his second year. If he can take on more of those 8-man fronts, but it's not like when he was still playing well down the stretch, even with Matt Barkley in, and I don't think anybody was loading up the back end of their defense against Matt Barkley. So it's not like 8-man fronts are going to be new to Jordan Howard. So I think that some of this talk of like a sophomore slump, and his average was really good last year. I don't know what it was off the top of my head. I know it was in the high 4s, I think.
I think he was averaging over 5 yards a carry. Just let me pick up on that later.
That's going to fall, like, inevitably. I mean, it's really, really difficult to continue to average 5 yards per carry in the NFL. for any length of time. So that's going to fall a little bit, but I think that
5.2 yards per carry, sorry.
yeah, 5.2 yards per carry. That's really hard to keep up in the NFL. I think we both would say that. So I don't know. I think the yards will be there. The carries are going to be there. But I think that all this, like, given that he's going to have some sophomore slump or decline might be a little bit overblown. Just because, I don't know, I see the workload being there unless somebody comes up in camp and really blows everybody away.
I think, to note, the workload's going to be extended too, considering he only started 13 games last year because the Bears still, for whatever reason, started Jeremy Langford to start the year. And he only had 4 games where he had 20-plus carries. I mean, he might have had a few games where he also had receptions, and that would have counted as touches. But he only had 4 games where he had 20-plus touches. So he's going to have the opportunity to maybe do it across 16 games, the same amount of yardage, and then average 4 yards a carry. So that's, like you noted, it'll go down. What I'd like to see from him, I'm not so concerned about the sophomore slump in the running game. I'd like to see him be more of a receiver. He actually had the most dropped passes by a running back last year. It was at 8. So, and I don't think that he necessarily has to be Marshall Faulk out of the backfield, but he has to be a threat. He has to be someone that defenses, when they see him lining up, that he can be a guy that can catch out of the backfield, that can be a safety valve at minimum. I mean, Tarek Cohen's here, but he's more of a special packages player like Darren Sproles. Your star tailback in the 2017 NFL, or your starting tailback, has to be a guy that can catch at least 35 passes. And maybe Howard is that guy, but obviously we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah,
he maybe has worked on the offseason.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that is definitely going to be an area of his game that he has to improve. I don't think anybody should expect him to suddenly be Matt Forte, and
or Matt Forte. Yeah, that would have been a better
lead the Bears in receptions all those years and stuff. But like you said, you got to be a legitimate threat. Otherwise, he's not going to. Like I said, that's why I called him a legitimate 1-2 first, second down back, because he hasn't shown that ability to stay on the field for third downs quite yet. But that's somewhere that he can improve as a second-year player, get better in pass protection, which, he wasn't terrible last year, but, there's always room for improvement there. And then especially the catching the passes out of the backfield. If you want to be a 3-down back in the NFL, you got to catch balls. And he just didn't do enough of that last year, so he wouldn't be seen as a viable threat to do so, I think, by opposing defenses.
Let's move on to everyone's favorite, most quotable Bear of the past 2 years, Pernell McPhee, who stepped up to the microphone on Tuesday and noted that his goals for 2017 are to dominate and to, in paraphrase terms, demoralize opponents, all that. I mean, nothing too out of the sorts for this guy who's always talking, but who's missed 9 games in the past 2 seasons, who started last year on the physically unable to perform list. And even when he's on the field, it doesn't feel like he's always giving 100%. It's easy to chalk up McPhee as just, one of those hype guys on the team that doesn't always live up to what he's saying. But at what point do we stop believing in him? He's another player like White, although he's a veteran, where he hasn't earned any benefit of the doubt to be as confident as he's always portraying. I mean, what do you think?
Well, it is you make a good point. McPhee has been one of my favorite players when he's on the field. What he brings to the defense, he is a game changer. But you're right, his availability hasn't been there. And he does talk a lot. And I think that endears him to the fan base. But, talking in June doesn't do a whole lot for you if you're on the PUP list in October. This is kind of a put up or shut up year for him. I think that, he got a good amount of money, and when he's on the field, we see the impact. He makes plays, but at some point, I think the Bears signed him expecting him to have double-digit sack seasons, and he's only managed to get 10 total sacks in 2 years. So I think this is a year where, he needs to have at least 8 sacks, and to really back up his trash talk. And, and that's just because of the rotation that the Bears are going to have, and obviously what they have with Leonard Floyd, and they never released Lamar Houston. He's coming back, and obviously, how am I blanking on his name?
Willie Young?
Yes, Willie Young. So those guys are all coming back. So there's going to be a rotation at outside linebacker. We know that. So, I don't know that, 15, 16 sacks might be out of the question for any one.
I mean, that's like a Von Miller type. I mean, I don't think McPhee is that.
No, and I don't think he is. Yeah, that's true. So I don't think you can ever expect him to do that. But, if a really good season for him is between 8 and 12 sacks, that would be great. But you're right. I think that this is going to be a put up or shut up year for him.
Is he a starter by the time the Bears make the playoffs, whatever they do? I mean, if it's 2017, 2018, is he a starter on the roster? Is he still with them?
I think a lot's going to depend on this season. If they take the steps that they want to take this year and be between like 6 and 8 wins, then maybe you can look down the road and say, well, maybe the playoffs in 2018. Right now, I would say I doubt it. I think this team has a long, long way to go. His bulky knees, you just never know. He's had a lot of surgeries on him. He's lost some weight this offseason.
Yeah, 20 pounds.
Yeah, maybe that helps him stay on the field this year. Maybe that helps him, gain a little bit of speed. But at the end of the day, he's an aging player. He's 20. He'll be playing this year at 29. Well, I guess he'll be 29 in December. But still, he's getting a little bit older. So I don't know. I think that it's hard to project a guy who's had so many knee problems and say that guy is definitely going to be starting for this team in 2 years. He might still be here, but he might be in the rotation. But I don't know. I don't think we can say with any amount of certainty that he'd be a starter. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, the only guy I really trust is Leonard Floyd, and Floyd even has his own questions, but he's 24. He's their one high-priced asset they have at outside linebacker. It's kind of why I was a little apprehensive at the fact that they didn't add a guy at that position in the draft or free agency, even though I totally understood why. It's not as big a priority necessarily. But with Houston, with Young, with McPhee, they're going to be solid enough players, but I'm not sure they're necessarily any starters on a playoff team. And that's how this is going to go moving forward. For McPhee, I just hope eventually – because he's one of those players that I feel – and this is just purely speculation on my part – he's one of those players that he speaks up a lot. He talks a lot and doesn't necessarily always back it up. And I don't think players in the locker room, like certain teammates – I'm not going to speculate who – necessarily appreciate that. I mean, I'll know from my personal experience playing, I'll know from my personal experience covering football teams that they don't like those kinds of guys, that not everyone likes those kinds of guys that are rah-rah and then sort of quiet down or can't stay on the field, I mean, bluntly with McPhee. So, I mean, we'll see how that develops with them.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to we have a good mailbag this time. Let's get to the mailbag. Okay. So first one, we have we can do like 5 or 6 here. A very serious one. Okay. From @BestHumanTalent. Why is Mike Glennon's neck so long?
Um, Genetics is the easy answer. I don't know. He does have a really, really long neck, though.
Yeah, I mean, Napoleon Dynamite. I mean, that's the easy nickname answer. Genetics, Lance, at best human talent. That's what we can say here. I'm not a doctor. I'm not so whatever. I'm not. I didn't get a medical degree. I can't tell you that. At John Faker. Okay, so an actual serious question.
Okay.
What is the cutoff date where Mitch Trubisky starting becomes okay? So, like, if in his words, like if they suck real bad, when do you say it's okay? Okay, it's time to play the kid.
I don't know. For me, I'm really on board with just redshirting him this year. You know what? I mean, if they're, I mean, maybe you just like throw your hands up and say "F it" when if the team's like 2-7. But I think you guys kind of talked a little bit about this last week. You and Jack. It's hard to say, but if Glennon is playing any amount of like average football, meaning he has more touchdowns than interceptions, and he isn't actively losing you games, I don't see a scenario where no matter how good or bad the record is, that they turn to Trubisky. I think that it would just have to be like Glennon just goes out there and is like 12 interceptions, like 7 touchdowns, completing, like 58% of his passes, and the team goes like 3 games with like 2 offensive touchdowns, then maybe they're just like, well, whatever, it's out the window. But I think as long as Mark Sanchez is healthy, I think they're really going to do everything they can to keep him on the bench. So I guess to answer the question, at what point do you say, fine, start the kid? I would say it's if Mike Glennon is abysmal. And like I said, the offense just is stagnant and isn't scoring points, then maybe you say, fine, let's turn it over and see what this kid can do.
I think yeah, exactly. I think it has to be where I would feel comfortable, where the Bears would feel comfortable too. If it's Glennon and he's not playing well, he's playing at a subpar level, but say the offensive line is still playing well. This is what Jack mentioned last week. The offensive line is still playing well. The receivers, you can tell that they're running routes, they're getting open. I mean, you can obviously evaluate that on film however you want, but it's literally Glennon. And the team's struggling or the offense is struggling, then, I mean, you can make the change comfortably. I think the timeline, you're definitely not going to see him in September. You're probably not going to see him in October, barring some kind of injury to Glennon, barring some kind of injury to Mark Sanchez or Connor Shaw, whoever wins that backup quarterback job. There is the possibility that Trubisky somehow wins the job in training camp, which, I mean, if you're the Bears, you can't rule that out. You're not going to just shut down a competition, and for the sake of shutting down a competition, that doesn't really help anybody. But in the case of realistic perspective, it's only if because you don't want to throw in Trubisky and have him shell shocked. You don't want to throw him in where the team's 1-8, 2-7. And it's not just Glennon. So the defense maybe is playing relatively well, but say the offensive line isn't protecting, the receivers aren't catching passes. Why would you, and the team's struggling, why would you put Trubisky in that scenario? Why would you allow the possibility to give your young quarterback, who is your future, the yips? That's happened before with one-year starters, and I think the Bears want to specifically avoid that. That's why they have Glennon here in the first place.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and definitely the other thing is, if the offensive line is playing bad, the receivers aren't getting open, and then you throw Trubisky out there. Not only are you giving him a chance to fail and a chance to, as you said, get the yips, but also develop bad habits. If he's not confident in the pocket, he's going to be passing out of. He's not going to be thinking about his footwork and his mechanics and those types of things. And, the Bears just got rid of a quarterback that had a tendency to go away from his fundamentals. So, yeah, I think I would absolutely agree with you. You know, if it really looks like it's just the quarterback position, then maybe they say, "Yep, time to turn it over."
Okay, so in that light, when do you think we see him at all in 2017 in a starting capacity?
I honestly don't. And I'll probably be wrong because not only because most of the time I am, but also just because there's so much pressure to play these guys right away. But I really kind of feel like Pace and Fox seem really, really committed to letting him develop.
You're trusting Fox now?
Well, I'm not trusting Fox necessarily, but at the same token, though, Fox has seemed to. It seems like he's a guy who doesn't always trust his rookies. So I think in that regard that he needs to coach for his job. So he wants to go with somebody who's going to be a steady hand and give him the best chance to win. So unless Trubisky has blown everybody away in practice, I don't know. I don't see it. I think that they legitimately are going to use this as a redshirt year and say it's all about 2018.
I disagree. I think he'll miss most of the year, but you'll probably see him at the tail end of December, final few games against the Vikings, Browns, 49ers. That's the realm where you start preparing for 2018. And I don't think it'll be – I don't, as much as I would love the ideal scenario, I think Lennon will actually be fine. And it'll have nothing to do with him. The Bears are just going to insert Trubisky because Glennon hasn't been as inspiring. I mean, Glennon isn't going to be Kurt Warner. I think I can safely say that, unless he's Kurt Warner. So those are the only types of quarterbacks that would be invulnerable to having their job removed. And maybe that's as long as he isn't starting right away, as long as you're not throwing him into the fire with that first really rough September schedule with the Falcons, the Steelers, the Bucks, and the Packers. I mean, I don't think it's too much of a problem if he's showing up at the midseason. By midseason, by the end of the season, I don't think that's too much of an issue. By then, he's used to NFL playbooks. By then, I'm sure he's a little more comfortable, and you can get some benefit from him seeing some game time to prepare for 2018 when he's likely going to start from the get-go. So I don't think that should be too much of an issue. Okay, we can try. So Bob Stoops, next Bears head coach. How does that sound?
No, I think I remember this question from the mailbag.
Chris.
Nip it in the bud now.
Asked yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. What was the? How did he phrase it?
Might as well try to dispel the Stoops rumors, said at Chris Holteras.
Yeah. I think that we can safely. The first commenter who drops that in the comment thread. I don't know about a permanent ban, but they should be ready to be flamed by the other commenters. Because honestly, I mean. I'll pull up his wiki page real quick, but I don't.
Hey, he bought a house in the Gold Coast area. Clearly, that means the Bears they're going to go after him. He's going to take this season off, and then they're going to bring him in to develop Trubisky. That's correlation equals causation.
The NFL? No, he hasn't. So I don't know. I don't think that he's a offensive guy or he's not.
He's a defensive guy, I think.
You're right. He is. He's a defensive backs coach, but I don't know. I don't see it. He's a career college coach.
Overrated college coach at that.
I would agree with you there, and so it's hard enough for coaches to go from college to the NFL. There's not a great success rate there, and also too, the Bears just have such a long history of going with first-time head coaches. I just have a hard time seeing it. And I just don't see a fit. I don't think that he would ever really be able to make that leap to the NFL.
if they do replace Fox after December, after the season's over, I mean, it'll be more of one of those hot offensive coordinators. I mean, that's kind of the person you want there to develop Trubisky. You want side by side with Trubisky, who's going to ultimately determine the fate of the franchise. It won't be. I mean, then again, the Bears did hire Fox 2 years ago, but it won't. But they won't do it again with an uninspired defensive hire who's never even been in the NFL.
Yeah.
I'm not, and with Bob Stoops, he kind of even strikes me as the NCAA version of Fox, to where he has a title. He does have a title, but he also has this reputation that doesn't precede him otherwise. He's called Big Game Bob, yet all I've seen in the past decade is Oklahoma losing big games and choking away big games, especially when they're highly ranked, or especially when or crunch time situations. And they for a defensive guy, they're in the Big 12. Their defenses have been awful. So what would he offer in bringing over to a team that's still in transition in 2018? It's not much, and I don't see. I mean, that doesn't fit the profile of a new pace hire as well. So, I mean, it doesn't add up beyond, oh wow, he just bought a house on the Gold Coast. Clearly, that means he's gearing up to coach the Bears after this year. That beyond that, it doesn't add up.
Absolutely.
Okay, so last question from at Matthew Balsley. This has been a hot topic the past month or so, past few months or so, but it's not exactly pressing because no one's necessarily concerned. Akeem Hicks is entering the last year of his deal. So with Hicks entering the last year of his deal of what he signed 2 years, he signed a 2-year deal with the Bears in 2016. What will you need to see from him to justify an extension? What's your ideal contract? What's your ideal deal? What does he need to prove? Does he need to prove anymore? All that in a jumble.
Not to me. He's been one of my favorite Bears players the last 2 years. I think that just another season like last year, played all 16 games, 7 sacks, a fumble recovery, 2 forced fumbles. If he just does another solid year like that, I think that he'll get the contract extension that he probably wants at this point. So he's been a consistent player. Seems like a good locker room guy. He really balled out last year. So I think that if he keeps that level of consistency, I think that things will take care of themselves. And that he would be a guy that the Bears would be interested in giving an extension to. He's 27, so he's still got some good football ahead of him.
Yeah, and I think he can maintain that place too, because I feel like for the first time in his career, he's in a spot where a defensive coordinator, where defense is actually using him to his best capability. With the Saints and Patriots, he was more of a role player. He was more of a run-stopping defensive end, which is fine, but that's not someone you necessarily pay $7, $8, $9 million. Last year, Vic Fangio unleashed him, and he had +7 sacks, and he was a pass rushing force, and he was probably the best player, most consistent player on the defense throughout the entire season.
Absolutely.
So you can, and there's no reason to expect a drop off from that, provided he's healthy this year.
Yeah.
So you can absolutely extend him. I think a reasonable term is probably 3 or 4 years, $32 million, right?
Yeah, that's something.
Guaranteed $16 million, $15 million, something along those lines. 50% seems like a lot, but this is probably the last big payday he's going to get in the league. So you do have to take care of him. And if you'll note, they kind of did that. They're kind of doing the same thing again with Jay Howard, not to be confused with Jordan. So it's a good deal. He's in a good position. I'm not sure how much I'd be too concerned either that they also haven't signed him. Last year, Willie Young didn't get his deal done until the Bears were into camp. So, or a new deal rather than an extension. So with Hicks, that'll probably be along the same timelines. They're probably no necessarily rush because, I mean, they're on good terms, and Hicks understands what he means to the Bears, and the Bears understand what he means to them. With him, he also has that. I think he's a bit opposite of McPhee. Obviously, he's 27, so he's 2 years younger than McPhee. That makes it easier to pinpoint this, but he'll probably be a starter the next time they make the playoffs. If they become a championship contender, he might even still be a starter there. So he has leverage, and the Bears understand that this isn't necessarily something that. I mean, the timeline will progress the way we expect it to.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so that should just about wrap up this episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. We discussed everything with OTAs from Victor Cruz, Kevin White, Akeem Hicks, adding Jeremy Maclin. Sam, do you have anything else you want to specifically add, not related to anything we touched on?
No, I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind. Just kind of a slower news period right now. Oh, I guess the last thing I just thought of it. Mitch Trubisky's contract. When are they going to come to terms with him? It's kind of getting into that area where you have to say, is it going to be that offset language, contract language that has held up a couple of rookie deals in recent years? Thinking about Joey Bosa last year, I think that it is kind of starting to linger into that area with the pay scale. These contracts get whipped out pretty quick, and this one's starting to drag a little bit. I don't know what your level of concern is with that, but I think that's going to be a building storyline here.
I think with the rookie pay scale, like you said, it shouldn't be too much of a concern because he's still allowed to participate in OTAs. That's probably going to be the same timeline as Akeem Hicks. They're not gonna. The Bears aren't. They're not like the Chargers with Joey Bosa last year. They understand the extra time, and especially with a quarterback. They understand Trubisky needs those reps, even if he's not starting right away, that he has to be in camp. He has to be learning as soon as possible under mandated practices when he has to be under contract. He's the number 2 overall pick. The contract terms itself should be easy to figure. I think Spot Track guy nailed it down at something like $21.5 million over 4 years, over 5 years, with over 4 years with the 5th year option. I mean, that's not too much out of the wrong possibility. You take a quarterback at number 2 overall. Just because he hasn't signed yet, that doesn't mean to me automatically that talks have stalled, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That just means that they're not rushing along because they don't have to.
That's
now,
fair.
If he's not signed by July 20th, if he's, we're getting to July 26th, camp's going to start up, then you can start sounding the alarms. Like, I mean, him even missing one practice to me is less than ideal. So but I think they'll wrap it up. I don't think there should be necessarily too much panic in that light. Okay, so then now we can wrap it up after talking about literally the most important player for the franchise. So this has been Windy City Gridiron Radio. You can follow us and all of our work at WC Windy Gridiron on Twitter. Follow Sam at Sam Householder, literally his name. Follow me at Robert Ziglinski, literally my name. And we'll be back next week. So we're doing this again, as I know last week with Jack, rotating co-hosts. So I'll return next week with somebody else. And with this, we're going to keep moving forward. Next week, wrapping up OTAs, we'll have maybe a little more talk about, a little bit more to hype up for camp as we get into the dead period of the NFL season. And then should be an exciting time. Things will be rolling along. Yeah. Sam, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Stay classy, everyone.